Okay, so I'm going to go through a little bit of an overview here of what I'll be covering. Just go ahead and ask me any questions. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat or just chime in. We're doing well on time here, so just go ahead and ask your questions, and I can go ahead and stop and make sure those get answered. All right, so to start out, there is an S3 bucket set up with some of the content here. Let me grab that link for you and put it in the chat. I believe it's in the documents as well. I'll drop the document one more time here that we were following yesterday. Today we'll be starting on page 50, module 3. Let me get you those links in the chat section. Go ahead and drop the document one more time. And then let me grab the link. Okay, it looks like that zip file's up and ready to go. Here's the link to some of the assets for this section. Available in the chat there. All right, so go ahead and download that link I put in the chat. It's also up on the screen there. And that will give us some of the code, so we don't have to write any JavaScript today. It'll give us some of the test functions and a contact flow that can be imported, much like we did earlier when Jono showed us how to import the flow that came with the sugar setup. All right, so these are just some instructions of kind of the steps we're going to be following. First, we're going to create a table. I'm going to go through all this step by step as well live in the console, but let's just kind of take a look at a high level of what we'll be doing first. These are kind of the goals. First, we're going to create a table with the employee name, the employee ID as the primary key, and that's it. So it's going to be a pretty simple table entry, and we'll get that set up in Dynamo. Then from there, we're going to go over to Lambda, and we're going to create a function. We're going to make a new function in the node runtime, and then we will modify an IAM role to give that Lambda permission to access Dynamo. From there, we're going to go back over to Connect, and we're going to whitelist the Lambda that we created so that may be used in Connect, much like we saw yesterday with the Lex bot that needed to be whitelisted first before it was available in Connect. So let's just go ahead and get started on that. Again, I am on the top of page 50 in the documentation. So I'm going to go into the instance we were working on yesterday. I called that one Sugar Bootcamp, and just pick up where we left off. Just go ahead and log into your instance, go to the bar at the top and connect, and type in connect, and that's the page I'm on right now. From there, I'm going to go into my Sugar Bootcamp instance, which is the one I made yesterday, not the one I made this morning, as it builds on some of the stuff we did yesterday. From there, I'm going to log into my instance using this login URL here, just to have that up in a little bit. But we're mostly going to be doing stuff in the console in that other window I have, or tab rather. All right, so we're in Connect when it's time to do the flows. All right, so moving on page 50 there. First, we're going to set up the role and policy for Dynamodb access. Generally a good idea to kind of think about your permissions first before you start building things. Everything in AWS kind of follows the model of least possible permissions. So you want to be very specific with what you give things permissions to do. Generally, pretty much everything in AWS starts with no permissions, and you go from there, specifying which other services you're going to allow this item that you're creating to interact with. So in this case, we're going to go back to the top bar there, and we're going to type in IAM, and that will take us to the Identity Access and Management page. Now that we're here, we're going to select Policies on the left-hand side. And then we're going to create a new policy. As you can see, there's a fair amount of kind of pre-made AWS managed policies available to us, but we're going to go ahead and make a custom one. Now here, there's two ways you can do this. You can either use kind of the visual editor, which is definitely useful in helping you refine your policy, or if you already have a similar one that you are aware of, or you kind of know how this all works, you can just write JSON right here. But in our case, we're going to use the visual editor. So under here, we're looking for services. The service we're looking for in this case is Dynamodb, which came up for me right there. So I'm going to select that. From there, we're looking for the actions of get item, put item, scan, and query. There's get item. Here's put item. Scan. And query. All right. For the resources, I'm just going to go ahead and say all in this case. You can also specify just the table name. So that's what's kind of warning us there is, hey, this Lambda that you're creating would be able to do all this on any resource. You can also drill that down more specifically and say only the table we're going to create, but we don't have the details of that table quite yet. We're going to go down to add additional permissions. And we're going to choose a service. From there, we're looking for CloudWatch logs. I'm going to go ahead and click on CloudWatch. And we're looking for 3 policies there. We want create, I think my service there needs to be CloudWatch log specifically rather than CloudWatch. Yep. There we go. Now I should see create log group. There it is. And create log stream. And put log events. The resources again, I'm going to say all. Then we're going to click review policy here at the bottom right. From here, it's asking us to name the policy. And I'm going to go ahead and just copy paste that Lambda employee booking, just following along with the guide there, which will make it easier as we go. For the description, you need to put something in there. I'm going to just say Dynamodb and Cloud watch access for Lambda employee booking. Then we're going to go ahead and click the Create Policy button on the bottom right. Now what we've done here is just created the specific policy that allows those actions, but what's going to actually be assigned to the Lambda is a role. So now we need to create a role, and then we're going to attach the policy we just made to the role. One role could have many policies attached. You can also create groups and users and have a specific set of policies attached to that group and then assign that group to a user. But in this case, we're not dealing with people, we're dealing with something that we're creating in an AWS service, whereas groups and users should be more for individuals. So in the navigation pane here, I'm going to go ahead and click on roles. And then I'm going to click Create Role. From here, we need to choose a service. Lambda is a common one. It's at the top there for us. Otherwise, we need to go through this list and find it. But I'm going to go ahead and select Lambda right there. And then hit Next. Now we're going to look for that policy we just created a moment ago, and we're going to attach it to the role we just created. And there it is. So I'm going to select the policy there and go ahead and hit Next. At this point, we could add custom tags. It's just kind of a label that you could put on something to track it. You will see that tag throughout the logs, and it's useful in other ways if you need to really keep track of what's going on within your organization. For the purpose of this demo, we're just going to leave that blank for now. Tags are not required. All right. So now we're going to name this role. I'm on number 8 at the top of page 51 right now. Just going to copy paste that in. We have a description pre-filled there. I'm just going to leave that as is. I'm going to go ahead and hit Create Role. Now the role should be available. We see it there. And we're going to come back to this in a little bit. Now we need to create the table in the Lambda, and then we'll assign this role. All right, so we're jumping over to Dynamodb. I'm going to start to type Dynamo at the bar at the top. There it is. I'm going to right-click and open it in a new tab so that in case we need to go back to IAM, I still have that available to me. All right, so this is the main page of Dynamodb here. You want to click that little arrow at the left to open the tray there. Dynamo is Amazon's NoSQL database service. Here at Aspen, we tend to reach for this right away when we're building things. It's just quicker and easier to use non-relational. They're spun up super fast. The response times are usually milliseconds. If you don't have a ton of data or super complicated queries, then Dynamo is usually a tool we reach for. If queries start to get more complicated in the future, the data set starts to get more complex, or we need to start doing complicated things like joins with the table, then we start to think about SQL and maybe use a service such as RDS. But for most things, Dynamo is usually quick, easy, really inexpensive. So we're going to go ahead with that today, as this table will be pretty simple, as you'll see. So we're going to go to Create Table. I'm going to name this table Employee. Take that colon out of there. All right, now we need to give our table a primary key. The primary key is the partition key. You can also optionally use a sort key. This is kind of the key that you're going to use to retrieve the item that you're looking for in the table. So all items in this table will have to have a primary key. It follows this pattern. But one thing that's different about NoSQL is each row could have a varying number of columns, whereas in a SQL database, you have to have the same number of columns for every row. So the primary key in this case, we're going to call employee ID. Go ahead and add that in there. Note that parameters are case sensitive. And then we'll go ahead and create. In this case, we don't need a sort key. That's if maybe you're doing a little more complex queries. As you're going to see, these items are going to be very simple. There's only going to be 4 columns on each item. It's going to take a moment for the table to be created. We'll just keep an eye on that for a moment. Okay, now the table is ready to go. That was pretty quick. Now we're going to create a secondary index. Let's go ahead and hit indexes at the tabs across the top, and then select the create index button. So the partition key or primary key in this case could be phone number. And then as you can see, it auto-populated that second field with phone number index. I'm just going to leave the read and write capacity at default. I don't think I'm going to come anywhere near that number. This won't be in production. There won't be a heavy load on this table. A lot of queries will probably only call it a few times. Odds are it will stay in the free tier. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create index. We'll wait a moment while that's creating. I'm on number 11 on page 51. All right, it still looks like it's working there. Once the index is created, we're going to start adding some data to this table. It does take a moment sometimes for the indexes to be updated. I've seen this take a couple minutes at times, but we won't be able to create the item until this is complete. So I'm just going to keep waiting here. Still waiting on the table there. Normally if I was working, I'd move on to something else. I want to we could jump over and start working on the Lambda, but I want to avoid the confusion of jumping ahead and then circling back. All right. So we'll jump ahead to the Lambda there while we're waiting. So I'm going to move to page 52, or at the top there where it says Lambda integration. We can at least go over the introduction to Lambda. Go ahead, type Lambda in the top there. I'll open in a new tab and keep this one open so we can keep an eye on this. In this instance, I don't have any Lambdas yet, otherwise you would see them all on this page. We tend to reach for Lambda a lot here at Aspen. It allows you to do almost anything in a serverless model without having to worry about provisioning and spinning up and running your server and maintaining it all the time. Essentially, you can just put in a piece of code, and that code will just wait until it's called, at which point it will spin up a container with your Lambda function and run the piece of code. Then it keeps the container warm for a few minutes. If another request comes in, it processes it. Otherwise, it tears the container down automatically. Another thing to understand about Lambda is that the same function can be running in parallel many times. So there are going to be a lot of instances of the same thing happening. So if you have a bunch of requests coming in, it's not one function that's trying to process it. It will spin up many to process the request. Another great thing about it is you only pay for the compute time that you use. So there's no charge for your Lambda while it's waiting and not in use. And in Connect, we have the option to invoke a Lambda in the flow, as I showed real briefly yesterday. So that gives us the power to do almost anything within Connect, as we can call a Lambda function and then run whatever code we want to within the Lambda function. There is a slight limitation on that in that I think the maximum time Connect will wait for a Lambda is 8 seconds, which makes sense. You don't want to have a caller on the phone experiencing a pause like that or in the chat. So you just have to design or architect your solution well so that the Lambda run times are short. Unless you're doing something really heavy, usually Lambdas run incredibly quickly, like milliseconds. Only time we kind of run into that limitation is when an API is responding slowly, which isn't on Lambda, it's on the service that it's calling, not answering. So we have to work around that by caching data or using some other solutions. All right, it looks like our index is now created. So I'm going to move back over here. We go to the Items tab. So I'm on number 11, or 12 now, rather, of page 51. And I've selected Items, and then Create Item here. Now what we see here, I'm just kind of editing an item. You can use this kind of GUI here. I tend to just write JSON right in the panel. Normally, you'd probably be creating items programmatically. It's not super efficient to manually type your data in, but you could upload a spreadsheet. A lot of times we'll write scripts to pull a bunch of data from a CSV or something like that and create our table in mass. Lots of other strategies, or your code itself will be creating the items once you have a Lambda function or something designed to set the data. But in this case, we're just going to put it in a little bit manually. As we can see off the bat, this table knows that everything will have at least an employee ID and then the index, secondary index, the phone number. So those items are required for everything in this table. So I'm going to go ahead and add the employee ID. I'm going to put in 101, just following that image there on 14. As far as the phone number, I'm going to put in my phone number. And we're going to put in employee name. Making sure to write valid JSON here, which requires these quotes and commas after each item. I'm just going to follow what they have there and do the same pin. Be a string of 111. So that looks good. The console will throw an error if the JSON's not valid. You'll see a little warning on the side there. Like if I take this away, see that X now. Give me a little hint. Hey, you forgot a comma there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now we see that our table has one item. So the columns are right here, ID, name, PIN, phone number, and the row is just that one item. All right, so I think that's all we need in this table. Now be sure with your phone number to do +1 or whatever your country code is at the front. I'm going to go ahead. I already hit save there, step 16 as we see the item. I'm going to leave this open for a moment, but let's just move over to Lambda. You can get there by typing it in the top. I already have it open this tab here, so I'm just jump back over there. All right, so we're going to hit the create function button at the top right corner. And in this case, we're going to do author from scratch. The other options there's some kind of pre-written ones available for you. And it gives you a template. In this case, we're going to create our own. I'm going to go ahead and copy the name on line 4 there of page 52. That in. For our runtime, I'm going to run the latest version of Node. I think it's calling for 8 there. That's a bit out of date. I don't think we even have that available to us anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And for the existing role, we're now going to assign that role that we created a moment ago. So open that dropdown that says change default execution role. And then I'm going to select use existing role, which will then give us another dropdown. And we see the only one we have available to us there is the one I created, because I don't have a whole lot else in this instance. Now selected that role. We don't need to worry about these advanced settings. I'm going to hit create function here. All right, so we kind of have the bare bones of a basic function here. A lot of stuff you can do in the Lambda console here for this individual Lambda. As a developer, this is where I spend a fair amount of time. Won't dive into it too far. Just at kind of a high level, this section here is where we have the actual code of our function. We can see here it's just kind of giving us a blank to do, put your code here, and then a response. In here, some details about the runtime. This is kind of what the main file is going to be, which is index and then the handler function. You can make a more complicated structure here where you could have many files within this folder and have them reading in each other. But in this case, we're just going to keep it to one. some basic settings. One that I adjust sometimes is the amount of memory that the function has or the amount of time it needs to run. But in this case, I would expect Dynamo within the same region and instance to respond within probably 200 milliseconds, 300 milliseconds. So should be fine on that. It'll be much less than a second. State machine is a little more complicated. It's if you want to have step functions. We kind of chain together a series of lambdas where the input of one was the output of the prior, and then you can do some branching logic there. Like if the output is this, run this function, otherwise run this other function. Do some pretty cool stuff with that. This is just kind of the amount of concurrency. So you can run this same lambda could be running 1,000 times with like different versions, identical, spun up, like processing different things, but still the same lambda. We don't need to get into the rest of this. You have some access to permissions here. You can set up a trigger for your Lambda. So say something like, oh, whenever an object is written to this specific folder within an S3 bucket, fire this Lambda, or some sort of condition like that based off another service. Destination would be the output. Layers are installing software packages in here. I don't know, a common one is like if I'm writing Python, I use the request module a lot. So I'll install that as a layer. Then once a layer is installed, it's available throughout this instance. So anytime I create a Lambda, I can just quickly add that layer without having to pull it down, do an install on my terminal, and then zip the file back up and put it in Lambda. It makes it much easier so that Lambdas can share resources. This tab I tend to use fairly often when I'm developing. There won't be much here right now because this Lambda's never been run, but it's really nice as a developer to have access to all this information. Can see how many times my Lambda was run, how long it ran, any failures. You can adjust the range, it graphs all this stuff for you, whether it was throttled, how many times, how many concurrent executions, or how many versions of it were running at once, or different invocations of the same Lambda, all that stuff. Very, very powerful. All right, so it's looking like it wants us to grab this file here, number 8. I believe it was in the resources as well, but I'm just going to go straight to that S3 bucket. There it is. So we just have some JavaScript here. I'm just going to copy paste this. Put this link in the chat as well. Jump back over here. I'm going to paste that in. Now we have all this code. Deploy is kind of like save. It used to be labeled save a while ago. They changed it to deploy. Now that's available. Let me grab this link for you. Paste that in the chat right now. All right, jumping back over to our employee booking Lambda. The docs just started going over there kind of at a high level what's going on here. I know, most of us aren't developers here, so we don't need to go too far into this. Just a kind of a basic understanding of what's going on here. At the beginning, we are use strict is a JavaScript term, just talking about strict JavaScript. Then here we're requiring the AWS SDK, which gives us access to a bunch of methods or functions that were already written by AWS for us. That way we don't have to code everything from scratch. We can just use some functions that are already created to do common tasks in AWS. So we're importing that library. We're also importing Dynamodb here, which is connecting us to the Dynamodb client, which will allow us to reach that table we just created. For debugging, we have a console log at the beginning that's just going to print the event. The event is kind of all the information that was passed into the Lambda when it's invoked. And as a developer, that's definitely something you want to see when you're trying to debug. What exactly was passed to this function before it was run? This next section here, we got some variables, a little bit older school there. Usually use a const or let in JS now, but that's all right. This code will run fine. Here we're just kind of grabbing things from the event. So you can see these parameters that are coming in, the phone number, the employee ID, the employee PIN. And then we're creating a empty object there that we're probably going to store some stuff in later. So this Lambda will be able to handle both unauthenticated and authenticated callers. It's kind of designed to, it'll just have branching logic within it to handle either. So this Lambda will return authenticated for someone whose PIN matches what's in the database. And if it's not recognized, the contact flow will then ask us for some other parameters or prompt the caller. All right. So this is just kind of the meat of the search. That's the table name. We call the table employee. So we establish our connection to Dynamo, and then we're saying, hey, this is the specific table I'm trying to reach. Have a condition there. If the phone number exists, then try and look up the employee by the phone number that's in there. And we're going to print out the phone number that was found, query table, and try and find all that stuff. Otherwise, if we have employee ID, then we're going to search for the employee ID in the table, try and match it. So this is the case if the phone number parameter has not been set down here. And then if we don't have an employee ID or a phone number, then we can already assume that they're an unknown caller. So it's going to call unknown there. This section is kind of the query of the table, which is being called up here if we have the parameters. And it's just trying to get the data from the table and then return that back to connect. Search is trying to match the pin in the table. I have some comments there showing us the different numbers it's returning here for the different conditions. So 1 is the employee was found. 3 was the employee exists, pin's wrong. 2 is prompting for a pin. Set unknown is the case of we don't have the information we need to look this up, so we can already assume that they're unknown. And this is just kind of forming the return of the data that we're going to get back to connect. All right, so we can test our function here before calling the phone number. So we're going to set up a test event. So I'm going to hit the arrow there, figure the test events. This is newer here. They've added some default test events. There's one for connect now. It's nice. You see that that's kind of what invocation event from Connect typically looks like. It has a lot of information in there that we can reach into with the Lambda, such as the contact ID, what channel the communication is, the customer's phone number, a bunch of other data available there. In this case, I'm just going to make a blank one though. So I'm going to make the case of an unknown phone number. And we're going to start with details here. I'm just kind of following that image that's at the bottom of page 56. Also may be in the assets we downloaded. So I'm going to check there real fast. Yes, it does look like that's there. So let me unzip that file. That was the S3 zip file that I posted in the chat earlier. I'm unzipping that in another window. And I'll open it up and show you what's in there. So we want the unknown phone number event. Go ahead and grab that. And just paste that in here. And hit format, create. So now I can invoke this Lambda with these test parameters I just created. In this case, we expect it to be an unknown phone number. I'm going to run the test there. We see that our Lambda ran. It succeeded, didn't error out. And we can see what it returned there. It's the event that came in, and then it returned 0, unknown, null, which is what we expected in this case. That also gives us some data over here. No, they haven't graphed yet, but it will show up in a moment. So now let's try the test case of an existing phone number. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this JSON here. Copy that. Create a new test event up at the top right. Configure test events. And I want to create new rather than editing the one we already have. I'll paste that JSON in there. I actually do need to adjust this a little bit. It's going to need to be the number that I have in the table. Otherwise, that would fail. I'm going to call this existing phone number. Now I can select the new event that I created. And we should see it return my PIN number, my name, all that. That looks good. We haven't set the PIN yet, so this is, as expected, under 0.17, page 56 there, or 57 rather. All right. So now we're going to do the case where the employee exists and they have a PIN. This was an existing employee without a PIN. And then we also tested the case of unknown employee. So I'm going to go ahead and create another test event. And I'm going to grab existing phone PIN. That one, labeled employee ID and PIN. Grab that little piece of JSON there. I'm going to create a new event, that JSON in. And I'm going to call this event existing phone number PIN. And as we see, I set my PIN to 111 and my employee ID is 101. So this should be able to get all this information. This is what we expect to be the successful test. So I'm going to select employee number PIN, hit run again. All right. So as we see in that image under 19, or 21 rather, employee ID 101, my name, null, employee type 1. It's good. And then we're going to test the final case of the employee ID being correct, but the employee PIN being incorrect. I'm going to go ahead and create another test event. Then I'm going to grab the employee ID wrong pin JSON there. Paste that in here. And we are going to create new. And I'm going to name this event employee ID wrong pin. So now we have all the different cases that it could occur. Those will persist here as these test events. So as a developer, that's useful to me. If I change my code at some point, I can still run all my tests and make sure everything's still working as I expect. I'm going to run the one we just created, which was employee ID wrong pin. Hit test. What we see is we got case number 3, which was this condition as we expected. Pin is null, but it still was able to find me. All right, for the final step here, we want to note the ARN of our function, which is right here. That's the Amazon resource name. Everything in Amazon kind of has a resource name like that to help you identify it or reference it in other areas. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Let's check over here, see if any stats have generated in the monitoring. A little bit. But obviously, something you were using a lot more, this would really fill out with a lot of information. Very useful to see all this stuff. We also, like we saw with Connect yesterday, we set up a CloudWatch log stream, which would be logging every time this Lambda is invoked. I can link to it right here. And as we saw with the CTR of the call tracing through each node, we also have a ton of information here about each time the Lambda was run. These are actually multiple invocations where you see the start, end, and then a report for each one. Pop all that open here. You can just kind of see like what was passed to the function and then what it returned. And if there were any errors, they'd be in here too, the error logs and your stack trace and all that stuff. I'm gonna jump back over here. So I have the ARN on my clipboard, which I grabbed up here. And I'm gonna move back over to Connect. So I left Connect open in a tab over here. You can also type Connect in the top bar. Click on that. I'm gonna jump back over here. From the Connect main page is where you would land if you typed in the bar. So I have my 2 instances. This is the one I created this morning while we were following Tono. This is the one I created yesterday and the one I'm working in right now. So I'm gonna go into that instance. And I'm going to give permission to invoke my Lambda within Connect and kind of connect the two together as we did with the LexBot. So in order to do that, we're looking on the left-hand side here. And selecting contact flows at the bottom. There's our LexBot from yesterday. Underneath it is Lambdas. So I'm going to open up this dropdown. Select employee booking and hit add. There we see the ARN again. Now this Lambda is available in the call flows to be invoked at any point in our call flow or IVR. Oops. I can just reload again here. So my session's been open since before we started the call this morning, so. All right. So I've added the Lambda function. It'll be available. I'm now at the top of page 61. So we need to make a contact flow to guide employees through the authentication process. So at the top there, we have a resource. We're not going to have to make this flow from scratch. This one's already in JSON for us there. Paste that in to my browser, and that pulled the file down automatically. It should be in my downloads now. Back over to Connect. I already logged into my instance. Let me close that tab though and just show you how to get back in. So I'm going to click the login URL here. Put my login information in there. That's that admin user I created yesterday. Go ahead and add my password. And I'm at the dashboard. From there, I'm going to head over to the left-hand side and go to contact flows. So looking for routing, contact flows on the left-hand side. From there, I'm going to select the create contact flow option at the top right. And we have a blank flow. And we're going to import the flow I just downloaded. Should be in my downloads folder there. Click import flow. Click select. Over to my downloads. Latest thing I downloaded was that flow. Go ahead and open that up. And hit import. All right. So you can see that just imported a flow. Chase down those errors. I imagine we're going to have to put in some information there. It was a little bit complex compared to what we've seen before. Maybe a good candidate for breaking this one up. We may just have to reselect some of those things like we saw with Jono earlier. All right, so we have the name, contact flow name and description. Okay, so we're just checking to see it's the same. Step 7 there should be employee booking authentication. It is. So the way this is going to work is we're going to come into the main flow now. And we'll hear the welcome chime and all that, and then we'll transfer to this flow, authentication, rather than the Lexbot. So we're going to have to modify that. But let's keep following the steps there. I'm on number 9, page 61. So the first thing that's going to happen in this flow is the Lambda function we just built is going to be invoked. You can see that in the invoke Lambda function node or block that's there. If you're selecting one in the future, it's under integrate. You can double click that and just take a look. I believe that ARN matches 014. Nope, it's a little different, so we're going to need to make sure that that's the right function. I'm going to go ahead and update that. Should still have the ARN on my clipboard. Paste that in. Oop. I'm going to jump back over here, grab that ARN, back here, paste it in. And then we already have that attribute set up to pass the phone number. I'm going to save that. Now we have two branches we could go down on the Lambda function. Success path, which is right here, or the error path, which goes this way. So if the Lambda function fails, go down this branch, and we're going to set a contact attribute, which we'll reference later in the flow. Let's take a look at that attribute. So that attribute in this case would be phone number failed. And we can reference that later. Or in other flows, it will stay with the call and the CTR as it flows through our call center. All right, so I'm on 13, page 63. The Lambda function is successful. We check the result that's returned. In our case, we want the employee type. We're expecting to get a number for those different codes there, right? 0, I think it was 0, 1, 2, 3. So if it's a 0, we're going to go down this path. If it's a 2, we're going to go down this path. I'll go ahead and hit save right now. See if those errors go away. Looks like they might have. Not seeing any more orange, so that's good. Everything's connected. All right, then in the case of unknown, it's another branch. Or the case of 2, so that's just kind of what's being outlined in the docs there. I'll explain it in a little more detail. If it returns a 2, we're going to play the welcome greeting, which will read off the person's name. So as we see there, the flow is, we call in, we hit this flow, that invokes the Lambda. The Lambda then checks the table. If it can get my name from the table, it will return that. So Spencer, and then we can reference that in the flow with that cache.external employee name. So we see in this play prompt, which will then play our name. All right, down on 17 there on page 65. Using a store customer input, the Lambda will get invoked one more time. So as I mentioned with Lambda, the same Lambda could be running in parallel many times, different instances, processing different things. So note there that this Lambda ARN needs to be updated. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Still have it at my clipboard. Save one more time. Next, we're going to check some attributes based on that second invocation, which is kind of arrowing over here. And then it returns either a 1 or a 3. So if the Lambda returns 1, we're going to go down this path. If the Lambda returns 3, we're going to go down this path. All right. So number 20 there, page 67. We're going to set the working queue. We're going down the path for employee booking authenticated, because this is an authenticated employee in this path. And then we will transfer them to the Lexbot flow. Something goes wrong there, that's just our error handling. Again, in production, you would probably do a little bit more complex error handling or alerts or alarms. But in this case, we're just going to play a message. If we get that case of an employee that's authenticated, but they have a wrong PIN, that would be this number 3 branch here. We're going to play the message. Sorry, your PIN was wrong. In that case, in production, you might give them another chance and invoke the Lambda again, but for purposes of this demo, we're just going to play a message and move on. Transfer them to the unauthenticated queue. Right, so I'm under 24, page 68. Going back to the branch where the employee was not recognized, we'll play a welcome message. And then ask the employee to enter their ID. All that should be entered there in the get customer input node. Right here. And it's prompting them for a press 1, which would then go down this branch. Timeout, default, or error will go this way. Another thing you can do with timeout is loop. And give them the same prompt again and give them a certain number of chances. If the employee presses 1, we're going to go down this branch. And we'll store the employee ID as a contact attribute so that it can be referenced later. Which is right here. All right, 27. Just another note to make sure to update your ARN there of your Lambda. Is the one that's in this flow. Is a Lambda from another instance. So let me go ahead and select this again. Update that. Just making sure that parameters there match the docs. So we have ID and PIN, and it does. I'm looking at the image on the top of page 70. Similar to the previous steps, we're going to check the results of the Lambda function. Show right here, and then we can branch our logic based off of what condition was returned, or number returned by the Lambda. So a 0 is an unrecognized employee here. A 1 is an employee that is authenticated, which will go up down this path, playing their name. And a 3 indicates an employee that's in our database, but their PIN was wrong. So we're going to send them down this path. The call is successfully authenticated. We're going to greet the employee by name. We saw in this message right here. And as we see, using that cache dot syntax, we're able to reference the return of the Lambda, which is external.employee name. This is down the authenticated path. We're going to set the working queue as employee booking authenticated, and then transfer them to the employee LuxBot flow. If something fails here, we're actually just going to disconnect. Again, in production, you probably track that a little more and transfer them to a live agent. All right. For an use case, the agent has to create the employees by name. So for that, we're going to use a whisper flow. A whisper flow is something that the agent would hear when the call comes transferred in. Right before they're connected to the caller, they would hear a brief message in their headset. In this case, they'd get a whisper that would say, Spencer is calling or something like that. Then they would know to greet me by my name. It's also something that would probably be customized in the CCP so that the information could be rendered on the screen rather than a whisper. So we're going to set up that Whisper flow. It looks like this is good here. I'm going to save and publish. And then over here, I'm going to navigate, go to routing, contact flows. And we're going to just modify the default agent Whisper, which is right here. We could also create a new one. We'd probably just have to change some references. That would be under create custom, or yep, create agent Whisper flow. Or we can make a new one, name it whatever we'd like, but in this case, let's just use the default. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the default agent Whisper here. All right, as we see here, it's not a whole lot there. It's just whispering the queue name to the agent. That way the agent may know, what queue it's coming from. You can have those maybe separated. Say you have a French queue and English, and you have a bilingual agent that speaks both. You might want to let them know before they take a call, whether they need to greet the person in French or English. Or whatever else, if you have someone that services multiple queues and say they're primarily customer support, but they also do tech support, you may want to tell them what type of call is coming in, and this is how you would do that. All right. So blue drop down arrow, save as, new name, employee booking agent Whisper. I'm looking at step 4 on page 73. Oop. Not sure what happened there. Let's try that again. Save as. There we go. Description. Just going to repeat the name there. Trim that white space and hit save. Looks like I renamed it there. I think that error was from whatever happened when I exited out. So we're going to keep the existing play prompt. And then we're going to add a check contact attribute block. Go ahead and remove this arrow here, move this down a little bit. I move these down so I have a little room. And I'm going to find a check contact attribute. I believe that's under branch. Yes. Pull that over. All right. Double click on this to open it up. The type is going to be user defined. Select that from the drop down here. I'm going to put in employee ID. Go ahead and save. And a little ahead of myself there. Add a conditional condition to check is greater than 0. All right, that will give us a branch. It's no match. Just going to end this flow. If it does match, we're going to add a play prompt. So the play prompt nodes are under interact. Go ahead and click that. Slide that over. And connect this there. Connect this here. And double click this to open it up. And we're going to enter some text to speech. And again, this is what the agent will hear on the transfer. Employees name is cache dot attributes dot employee name. Make sure you leave that space there, or just don't put a period. Otherwise, it will look for the literal employee name dot, which is not what our attribute is. It's employee name without a dot. We'll save that. Click save here. And I'm going to hit publish. All right. So I think everything's good for our Whisper flow here. So now we're going to add a reference to this Whisper flow in our employee booking transfer to queue flow. So on the right here, I'm going to go to routing. Then from routing, I'm going to go to contact flows. And I'm looking for the employee booking transfer to queue flow. I'm going to go ahead and select that one. Okay. And we're going to add a set Whisper flow node. We're going to go ahead and put that in here between recording and analytics and transfer to queue. Just checking my settings there. Let's make a little more room in this flow. I'm going to go ahead and break this connection right here. And I'm going to, under set, select a set Whisper flow node. Connect that there. Connect this here. It looks like our image is a little bit out of date. It didn't look like set Whisper flow had an air branch before, according to that image at the bottom of 74. So we need to do something with this error. In this case, I'm just going to route it into this error play prompt that we already have. Again, in production, you'd probably do more detailed error handling. For the purpose of this demo, we're just going to play a message. All right, so my set Whisper flow node is in there, but right now it says nothing selected. So I'm going to double click on the set Whisper flow node block. We want to agent, select the flow, the one I just created, and hit save. Those are all the updates for this flow right now. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And I'm going to go ahead and hit publish. All right. As the final step in this module, we're going to modify the employee booking main flow. And that will enable us to transfer our call to our contact center for authentication. So I'm going to go back over to routing, head down the path to contact flows. And we're going to modify our employee booking main flow, which, as you probably remember, was our entry point that our number is currently pointing to that a caller will encounter right away. Go ahead and open that up. Replace a new transfer to flow node after the play prompt. So under transfer, transfer to flow. All right, I have that block there. Looks like we want that right after this step here, in between these two. So I'm going to make a little room there. Remove that connection. Drop that in place. And connect everything again. I'm going to double click the transfer flow node to open it up. From there, I'm going to select my flow. And we're looking for employee booking authentication. Go ahead and save that. On air, we'll still go down this path, so we'll just leave that in place. But odds are you're going to reach the flow there. Go ahead and hit save. No errors, nothing's orange, everything's connected. Go ahead and hit publish. All right. From this point, we can go ahead and make a call, test this out. Might try the different scenarios of I should always be found because my phone number is going to stay the same. Don't have another phone around me right now to try one that's not in there. I guess I could modify the table to follow that path. But I could, from one number, test the case of a employee that's found with a correct PIN and an employee that's found with an incorrect PIN. From there, we can take a look at the CloudWatch logs, look at the Lambda applications, and see the metrics and data that's generated by way of me calling and testing this out. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make a test call here. Let me pull up that number. I'm going to navigate over to routing phone numbers. Here's my number, and it's pointed to the main flow, which is this, which we just modified. So I know that once I call, I'm going to start at this point here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and dial that number. 1-619-880. 4980. There's the chime.
Welcome to Amazon Connect Employee Booking Service. Thank you for calling. Your call is very important to us and will be answered in the order it was received.
Well, it looks like I went to an agent transfer there. I think maybe my save and publish hasn't set yet. It's pretty common. I've found that it takes a minute or two sometimes to see your changes right away. Stuff's just kind of bounced around the cloud a little bit, updating the data centers. So I'm just going to wait a moment and try it again. Could also look at the log, see where that call went, just to confirm. So I'm going to jump over to CloudWatch and just take a peek. Jumping over to CloudWatch. We go to the log groups for my Connect instance. Make sure I'm looking at the right one. Sugar Bootcamp is the one I've been doing all this in, so that's the one I want. Sugar Demo was when I was following Jonah this morning. And as we see, there is only one call from today. That was me just now. So I hit the main flow, I heard Joanna, played a prompt, and I was transferred. Oh. Okay, so actually what looks like what happened was we got an error from our Lambda, which which was access denied. And we still got the attributes of a phone number, so it didn't find the correct attribute. So I'm going to look into this right here. I either did not set the ARN correctly of the Lambda in connect, or the Lambda itself did not have permission to reach Dynamo. No worries, I'll get that resolved. I'm just curious right now if the Lambda erred. So I'm jumping over to the CloudWatch logs for the Lambda. So I would see the error in the dashboard here. Looks like the Lambda succeeded, so I think the issue is with connect. But just to be sure, I'm going to jump over into the logs to this Lambda function. Okay, we have one log group available. Looking at the last request there. Don't think I have logs from the latest invocation. Seeing that the timestamp is 18 after the hour, and I made that call probably closer to 50. But they'll show up in a moment. I'm going to check some things in Connect here. So it looks like I made a mistake there. It didn't persist when I added my Lambda function. I maybe didn't hit the plus button or something earlier. See how we see the Lex spot there, but we don't see a Lambda function. We're just going to debug a little bit on the fly here. There we go. Function was added. Refresh that because I feel as though I did that before, but maybe not. Now I see it persisted. Go back over to my contact flow. And just going to make sure the ARN is correct in the flow where we did all that setup for this. So you get to see a little bit of debugging here. We jump over to this authentication flow. Now I'm looking for every block that has the Lambda invocation, but that makes sense with the 403 that it wasn't whitelisted or didn't have permission to access that function. Which also makes sense because I was surprised a little earlier when I was pasting these in that my Lambda was not in the, yep, now it is. So I was a little surprised by that when I was pasting the ARN. This guide's a little bit out of date. You don't paste ARNs anymore so much as you do that. I thought maybe both worked. So I'm going to go through and look for every block here that calls that Lambda function. And go ahead and switch those over just by name. I believe it was invoked 3 times. There's one more kind of up to the top right a little bit, but just kind of checking. I see one there. So I believe it was 3 total. We've already grabbed 2. Come on. Go ahead and fix that. And I think those were the only 3 places where that Lambda was called. All right, so I'm going to save and publish. Wait a minute. Make another call. Expect it to work this time. I just forgot to click the plus button when I added that earlier. All right, so I saved and published. Just going to wait a moment. And then I'll make another call. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make my call again here. I'll call this number. There's the chime.
Hi, Spencer. Welcome to Amazon Connect Employee Booking Service.
Right, it appears it worked. I accidentally hit a button there. Okay.
If you would like to speak to an agent, please press.
So we went down the invalid path. I actually accidentally glanced the 8 key when it was about to prompt me to enter my PIN. So let me hang up, call again. But as we see there, I was greeted by name. So obviously the Lambda was invoked, and it did find my name in the table, return that information back to Connect, and then Connect read off my name, which was pulled dynamically from the table by calling the Lambda function, which then did a get to the table. Table responded with my name. That was passed back. So the chain kind of went Connect to Lambda to Dynamo, back to Lambda, back to Connect. Let me try one more time. I'll try not to accidentally hit a button there.
Hi, Spencer. Welcome to Amazon Connect Employee Booking Service. Please enter your PIN.
All right, so I'm going to enter my PIN, which is 111 rather.
Sorry, the PIN entered is invalid. If you would like to speak to an agent, please press 1.
I think I may have timed out there. Test the transfer agent.
Thank you for calling. Your call is very important to us and will be answered in the order it was received.
No one's in queue right now, so that would be hold music. I could log in as an agent to take the call by popping up into CCP there and changing my status to online. I'm going to try that PIN one more time. I think I just didn't enter it fast enough, so I may want to increase the amount of time someone has to enter their PIN. I think it's only on a few seconds right now.
Hi, Spencer. Welcome to Amazon Connect Employee Booking Service. Please enter your PIN. Thank you. You have successfully authenticated. How can I help you today?
Book a hotel.
What city will you be staying in?
New York.
What day do you want to check in?
Sunday.
How many nights will you be staying?
2.
Okay, I have you down for a 2-night stay in New York starting January 24th, 2021. Shall I book the reservation?
Yes.
Thanks. I have placed your reservation. Thank you for our service to book a hotel. If you would like to speak to an agent, please press 1. Thank you for calling. Your call is very important to us and will be answered in the order it was received.
All right, so I went down the full path there. We see the call coming into the agent as well. Thank you for calling. All right, I kind of did both sides there. So I'm just going to hang up. We generated a little bit of data there, and we can look at the logs. Now the agent's in after call works status right there. Or they could create a task or take some notes or whatever you'd like. And then, another opportunity to connect to Sugar, your CRM, and have all that data on your customer collected. Close that out. Right, so that was successful down the whole path there. We saw the system work end to end, and we saw it kind of integrated with the stuff we made yesterday, where after I was authenticated, I hit the Lexbot, and then the Lexbot did its job as well, and then I elected to talk to an agent and was successfully transferred to one. All right. So a couple things we can look at as the result of that. Should see new metrics kind of going on with our Lambda here as it's being invoked. So again, this is really nice for me as a developer, having all this information available to me there. We can see that in CloudWatch, as I kind of debugged on the fly there, what happened the first time, should be new information on this log group based on the times when I called a few more times. As we see, there's a new group. It tends to lump them together for a little while. That has to do with the Lambda container. Each time it groups together like one group of logs from if it was spun up, and then if it shuts down and starts again, it starts a new log group. But we can see here, these are all the same call, ending in 6EE. If we needed to, as I used to debug before, we can kind of trace the whole path as it hits our first flow. Logging is enabled, Joanna set as the voice, a prompt is played. Continuing down here, here's where we see the Lambda invoked, the parameters that were passed to the Lambda, and then which are right here, and then what Lambda returned. So Lambda was given my phone number and how long it had to time out, and then it returned what it found in the Dynamo table, which was my ID, and then the type of 2. We kind of, by mistake there, tested the other flow, but we've kind of seen everything in there of all the different stuff that could happen on our call, and tested the different cases. So that kind of wraps up this module. Got a lot of windows open here and close them out. Does anyone have any questions about what we just saw on that module where we integrated Connect with Lambda and then Dynamodb? I guess one of the main takeaways to understand there as well is that Lambda could have called anything. We did Dynamo just because obviously this was super simple just for the demo. This is not what a table would look like in production, but Lambda could easily call a CRM such as Sugar via an HTTP request inside the code here and have pulled that information on your customer from your CRM or some sort of on-prem database or wherever you're storing your information on your employees. It didn't necessarily have to connect to Dynamo. We just connected to Dynamo for the purposes of this demo because it's very simple. Is there anything I can clear up on that section, or is there anything else someone would like me to demonstrate or something you would like to see that I can show you right now? All right. Kind of theme of this demo is we've kind of